What up, Coordination? On the pod today, we have David Ehrlichman, who is the author of a book about impact networks and also the co-founder of the HATS protocol. So basically, impact networks has been a really influential thing for me, because networks are a basic unified pattern that we see all over the world, from biological networks, neural networks, to economic networks, to now DAOs as networks. And so basically, impact networks, which David has written a book on and we go into in this episode, are a really great approach or structure to understand when you're facing complex issues and with greater levels of connectivity are needed between individuals in order to address the issue than would otherwise be available to you. So we talk about learning networks, action networks, and movement networks in this episodes, the 5 C's of impact networks, clarifying purpose and principles, convening the people, cultivating trust, coordinating actions, and collaborating for systems change. And so we kind of go back and forth between theory and action in this episode. David's also a founder, has implemented this stuff in the past and can abstract the theory out, but has the object level experience of implementing it. And I think that that's why he's such a fascinating person to talk to. And honestly, Impact Networks is one of my favorite books that I've read in the last few years. So what are the ways that we can leverage networks to create more impact than we could in a hierarchical organization? What are these lessons of impact networks have to do with DAOs? What does DAO leadership look like? How can we foster self-organization, promote emergence, embrace change, and hold dynamic tensions in these networks? I just think that David is so experienced, so lucid, and he's building DAO software. So there's lots of great lessons in this episode with David Ehrlichman. So without further ado, I give you David when we're going to be talking about impact networks. Enjoy.
The world has woken up to refi, and CELO is here for it. CELO is the layer 1 for the regenerative finance movement. It's fast, planet positive, and built for the real world. CELO has committed to producing a sustainable future from day one and has built its technology around one of the lowest carbon impact consensus mechanisms, and is the world's first carbon negative EVM compatible layer 1 blockchain. CELO is a movement to create the conditions of prosperity for everyone, whether it's tokenizing carbon credits with Toucan, providing capital to underserved communities with Unicorn, or building for millions of users around the globe. CELO was created to transform crypto enthusiasts into a movement of change makers. Follow along on Twitter at CELO.org to learn more about how CELO is accelerating refi for a positive, lasting impact on people, communities, and the planet. And if you're a builder interested in refi, be sure to join the Build with CELO hackathon live now with a prize pool of over $100,000. COINSHIFT is a leading treasury management and infrastructure platform for DAOs and crypto businesses that need to manage their treasury operations. Every crypto org needs to manage its treasury, and COINSHIFT offers a simple, flexible, and efficient multi-chain treasury management platform built on top of the highly secure Gnosis Safe. With COINSHIFT, your organization can go from primitive single-chain treasury management to expressive, flexible, and multi-chain treasury features, such as global user management, global contacts, proposal management, and many other features that can be shared across an entire organization, allowing users to save time and reduce operational burdens and gas costs. COINSHIFT even has data tools like account reporting across the 7 chains on which it operates. Used by industry powerhouses such as Uniswap Grants, Balancer, Consensus, and Masari, COINSHIFT is speeding up the coordination and efficiency of the organizations that use it. You have to keep up with the frontier, and COINSHIFT makes that easy. So sign up at coinshift.xyz/bankless.
Hey, David, what's up?
Hey, good to be here.
Yeah, likewise. Really inspired by your book about impact networks. So let's get into it. What is an impact network?
Well, what is a network? A network is a web of relationships that connects people or things. And everybody is aware of the social networks around us. Really, networks are everywhere. There are neural networks in our brains, mycelial networks underneath forest floors, the technological networks like the web of routers and cables that make up the internet. We know about social networks, the people we become connected to. What a lot of people don't recognize, though, is that networks can be really deliberately organized and coordinated to do so much more than just create connection. They can also be organized and coordinated to spark shared learning and increase the flow of information. They can be organized around action, and they can be organized to connect social movements together and change mindsets. Those are different forms of impact networks: learning networks, action networks, movement networks, networks deliberately organized to produce some kind of impact.
Got it. And how did you come to study impact networks?
It it goes way back. About 15 years ago, I was working at a nonprofit organization, and there I was noticing that they were doing great work, but they were so focused on their own programs and their own organization's health and kind of the annual cycle of fundraising, which is totally reasonable. It's the pressures that the kind of social sector uh, fundraising processes put these organizations into. We have to show a direct connection between the funding you get and the impact you create, and it really disincentivizes collaboration in a lot of ways, and the work where it's not clear the direct impact you're having, but you're creating some kind of larger systemic change. And so when I was there, I started to get really curious about how we could work not just within individual organizations, but really across organizations and across sectors and communities to address these big systemic issues. We're faced with so many big systemic complex challenges, and to address systemic issues, we have to work systemically, and that means crossing the silos and the boundaries that usually separate us. So that was kind of the key question that I held in my head. It led me to a year at a consulting firm, Monitor Institute, where I learned more about deliberate approaches to multi-stakeholder collaboration, and learned that there were networks out there that were deliberately organized and even staffed to connect upwards of 150 different organizations, in one case to reduce carbon emissions across 9 states in the Midwest. And that network REAMP had some pretty amazing impacts. And so I started to get really kind of inspired. That was kind of the light bulb moment for me. Oh my gosh, it's actually possible to strategically weave organizations together around these bigger issues that many of them touch. And so I left that consulting firm and helped to start a network myself that was connecting 48 different organizational leaders and their organizations to revitalize the city, Fresno, California. Later, helped start a network of 24 different organizations working to steward 500,000 acres of land. And large landscape stewardship is necessarily a systemic issue. As a simple example of that is, if you get rid of all the invasive species on your land and your neighbor hasn't done the same, it doesn't much matter, right? So you have to coordinate at a systems level. And that means bringing together the government agencies and nonprofits and academic institutions and tribal groups and timber companies together and dig in where they disagree, a lot of disagreement, but also where they do agree, and bring the different pieces of the puzzle together to see the whole system and how we can act and coordinate to improve the health of the whole system. Long story short, continued doing that work in a wide variety of fields and kind of all over the world. I worked with over 50 different impact networks, and saw common lessons and patterns that were arising between them, even though they were really different in terms of the place and the context. And that's what became the book, Impact Networks. And from there, after that, I started to really put a lot more attention into what was happening with DAOs, because there's so much overlap in terms of it's all about decentralized coordination. How can we coordinate better when decision making is distributed and leadership is distributed, ownership is distributed? And I see the work I was doing with impact networks as really a lot of the social layer and the social technologies of bringing different groups and communities together to get things done. And then DAOs are really pushing the envelope of any other space I see of what are the trust infrastructure or the systems that allow us to coordinate at much, much larger scales beyond which we can even know each other or form relationships with one another, and different tools and mechanisms for doing that. So over the last couple of years, I've gone all in on Web3 space and building DAOs, and we can get more into that. But that's the story of my progression through impact networks.
Nice. Well, I have read the book Impact Networks, and we'll put a link in the show notes. Would recommend it to all of our listeners, because I think that networks are just this unified basic pattern of how we coordinate with each other. And by the way, I love that you're using my favorite buzzword, coordination, as we're talking about this. It seems like one of the things I wrote in my notes as I was doing my research for this is that impact networks are a viable approach when 2 conditions are met. You face a complex issue that you can't solve on your own, and you need to weave greater levels of connectivity between individuals or organizations to address the issue. So I've always believed that networks are great because they can sense and respond and assimilate information from the edge of the network. Whereas a hierarchy top down, like the people who are in the trenches, you kind of like don't care what they're seeing on the front lines as much. Their hierarchies are good at projecting power in one direction, whereas networks are good at assimilating information from a complex issue. And so for me, that's like the reductionist why of impact networks. Would love to get into like how to build an impact network, but I think could we just synthesize a why before we get into the what and the how?
I think you said it well. They're good at different things. When we're faced with kind of simple or complicated level problems, hierarchies are really good. That's when we know, there's a beginning and an end. We can plan it all out in advance, relatively speaking. Something like building a bridge or completing a project. There's prior examples. We can allocate specific roles and responsibilities to get things done and execute, right? As you said, focus our energy on executing a thing. Networks are really good at addressing complex level problems where there's not a clear beginning or end, when we're kind of in this muck of uncertainty, and there's many different approaches that we could take. We need to learn our way, experiment our way through it. As the saying goes, crossing the river by feeling the stones. When we're faced with complex level problems, there's no single person, no single organization who can hold all that complexity by themselves. We're each just seeing one slice of the picture. Right? We're each holding just one piece of the puzzle based on our experiences and the specific piece of the work that we're focused on. And so we need to bring different perspectives together from across the system and do some collective sense making. First of all, just what's going on? Where have we been? Where we are? Where might we be going? And then start to find some alignment in that. And from that collective sense making, we can identify some points of leverage, some places where a small shift in one thing could produce big changes throughout the system, and start running experiments around those and learning from those experiments and sharing those learnings across the system and continue to adapt and evolve. Out of that, we may be able to identify some discrete pieces of work that fall back from the complex into the complicated domain. And that's where we can then bring back structures, even hierarchies, to then go execute on that and get things done. The network is really valuable in terms of engaging large numbers of people in this complex domain and finding our way through it.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing as we compare and contrast hierarchies in networks, we could maybe note that a hierarchy is a type of network, but it's one where orders flow down, maybe resources flow down, and then actions flow back. And a network can be like a superset of. You could have non-hierarchical networks also that are more focused on connecting and collaborating as opposed to commanding and controlling. So that's a great point. Hierarchies are also kind of like a type of network also.
Yeah, they're like a particularly rigid type of network, like a hub and spoke network where there's a single hub in the middle and then spokes and nodes that come out of that hub, and they only connect to each other through that central hub, right? That's the top of a hierarchy is the same as the center of a hub and spoke network, and we have the same bottlenecks and issues that arise. So when we're building impact networks or DAOs, it's moving beyond that hub and spoke stage and really creating these multi-hub networks or these dense core of activity and a large diverse periphery of individuals and actors that's much more fluid and not dependent on a single person or hub.
Yeah, and I'll just note that there's so many beautiful diagrams in the book, and trying to describe them, it's one of those pictures worth 1,000 words things. If you look at the diagrams in the book, or I wrote this governance post, lessons about impact networks for DAOs that we'll link in the show notes. Also, you can really kind of see the density of these networks, and looking at them visually, I think helps to articulate them as well.
I think, I love your post. I hope people read your post. If you don't read the book, just read that post because it does a great job summarizing, and it pulls a lot of the images out of the book that I was able to offer up in open source.
Yeah, I was thankful that those were open source so that I could share them with Gitcoin DAO in that gov post. I'm curious why you think so. For people who have studied the history of human organization, we know about the formation of capital markets, the East India Corporation being the first corporation. The company has kind of become the most used vehicle for moving private interests forward, and those are always very hierarchical. Why are networks that are non-hierarchical sort of resurgent? Does it have to do with our networked digital way of working, or is there something fundamentally different about the 21st century that's more complex that makes networks something that we need to focus on? Like, why networks now? It feels like everyone I talk to is obsessed with networkologies and that as an organizing principle.
Yeah, I think there's a few reasons. You spoke to a couple of them. It's the level of complexity that we're dealing with is bigger and bigger. There's as Tom Atlee has said, things are getting bigger and bigger, better and better, worse and worse, faster and faster, and bigger ways. So this complexity is growing, and with complexity, we need better approaches to address those levels of complexity and bring it back down to, and that kind of complicated domain where we can actually then plan and deliver. Hierarchies are not very good at engaging complex domains where we have to be really fluid and adaptive and connect really different actors from really different parts of a system. Hierarchies are really good at planning and executing. And so they've evolved to address those types of things. And our education system, we have a specific curriculum. People are running through the curriculum from point A to point B. It's pretty consistent. Obviously, it's leading to lots of issues too, but that's where that hierarchical infrastructure can make sense. It's a really consistent type of delivery. But the world is changing so quickly. The world is so different now than it was 6 months ago. So when we are organizing, I think we're limited by a single power hierarchy. We can still bring in the best of what hierarchies can do. And this is what I hope where we can get to with DAOs is actually blending the best of networks and hierarchies, because one isn't inherently better than the other. They're just good at different things. Again, hierarchies are really good at the point where we can plan and execute on a particular discrete thing or project or task. Networks are good at engaging large numbers of people and collectively sense making our way through it. And so I think we can really actually blend both of those together. Why networks now also is because we're just, I think, naturally more connected across these different systems and geographies and silos. And so we're seeing and just so presently aware of the different interconnections of and how all the different issues that we're facing are so interconnected. And we can't create impact in a tiny little box, because the work that we're doing is affected and going to affect other issues in pretty unknowable ways. So we have to stay connected. We have to be sharing this information, and we have to be coordinating our efforts.
Yeah. I mean, it feels like a fundamentally useful primitive. And so, like, let's say you've convinced me of the why of networks as a frame. What tell me how to build an impact network. Tell me what I should know next about networks. I see the 5 C's that you've put in there. What are the roles within a network? What are the sort of primitives of information I need to work in a networked world?
Yeah, we can start there. The 5C, those core activities, these really just came from pattern recognition. These networks have been so different, but there are really consistent activities that keep showing up over and over again. And these are not things that you check the box and you're done. It's you're continually revisiting them at every step of the process. And that's clarifying the purpose and principles of the network. Why are we getting together? What's the thing that aligns us? We disagree about many different things, but what is something that aligns us? And then the principles are, what are the values or the agreements that we hold that we can hold each other and ourselves accountable to? Principles are really key in super diffuse networks as well, like large social movements, where there are local chapters that are taking actions and making decisions locally and are by and large quite autonomous, but they're connected together through that shared purpose and the shared principles of how are we going to act? What are the filters we're going to use as we make decisions and take actions? So clarifying purpose and principles, then convening the people, just connecting people in all different types of ways. In the impact networks I've helped build and the ones I've studied, so often that act of convening together is a hugely important moment. It really is what kind of creates this center of gravity, this ball of energy that through which relationships are built, ideas are generated, actions are planned out, and this burning hot sun that draws other people in too. Convening people, there's really something so valuable about convening the whole system, or as much as is possible, of the different perspectives, et cetera, or the whole organization together to step back and kind of see the big picture and do that collective sense making. But connecting, convening people can also happen kind of individually and virtually, in person, in many different ways. But it's really about accelerating the flows of information. Then cultivating trust. So how do we build relationships? Networks are, again, webs of relationships connecting people or things. So networks are only as strong as the connections that hold them together. And networks are fragile when those connections are weak, or they're limited to kind of a narrow bridge, or a single person or actor who's connecting different parts of the system together. So how do we cultivate trusting relationships? Not so that we like each other. We actually don't need to like each other to be able to work together, and certainly not so that we agree with each other. It's actually so that we can disagree, so that we can engage in conflict and the inevitable disagreements that are going to take place when we work together. Now, if we're actually collaborating to the best of our ability, that means we're going to have really different points of view about what needs to happen. And we need to be able to, rather than that breaking off the connection and we go our separate ways, how do we hold the tension through that disagreement until we can either find something that we do agree on and we can work together on that thing, or at least have a greater openness to understand each other's perspectives, and maybe it'll change the way we see things. So cultivating trust, then coordinating actions. That's building on what's already happening, having greater awareness of what's happening across the system, figuring out how to share resources and where each of the different actions fits together. This is where it's so important to have an awareness of what's happening. And so many of the impact networks I worked with, the organizations we brought together, they're aware of each other, but they actually don't really know what each other is doing. And when you do as simple an exercise as sharing gives and gets, or needs and offers, to the point where an organizational leader can say, we're working on this issue, we're getting stuck here. A request I have is X. Other people in the room immediately, in every single case, they're like, oh yeah, I've done something like that I can share, or I have someone I can connect you to, or here's something I'm aware of. So connecting the dots, right? We're not actually having to share resources and make decisions together, but just better coordinating our efforts. We're retaining autonomy in our own actions, but we're aware of what's happening and where we fit in. And then collaborating at the systems level. And that's where that collective sense making, identifying the points of leverage that can shift the whole system, is so important. And then we can build structures out of that where groups of different actors can collectively move together and share resources and share decision making and collaborate to do specific pieces of work. That's also where it's really helpful to take these big issues that impact networks or DAOs are often trying to bite off, and then break them down into more discrete parts, more tightly bounded areas of focus around which we can go through the process again. What's the focus and purpose here? Who needs to be involved? How do we strengthen those connections? How can we coordinate our work in this area? And then what can we do? And what are the structures that we can build to improve our ability to actually execute on that work?
Got it. So to summarize, the 5 C's are clarify purpose and principles, convene people, cultivate trust, coordinate actions, and collaborating for systems change. This feel like very simple, and there's a nice mnemonic of them being 5 C's right there. But I think there's a lot to unpack with each of these, and probably a lot you learn as you iterate through doing those things over time.
Yeah, absolutely. And they are simple in concept, right, but really difficult in practice. And again, it's not like you just go through that cycle once. You're actually looping through it over and over. So as we start to work together and run experiments and learn, we're going to have a much better understanding of then how to focus and who else needs to be involved and how to connect the different actors together and so forth. And I think it's really important that DAOs and networks and all types of organizations kind of go through this cycle of learning and experimentation, and then come to a point of renewal where we may sunset the effort. We may say, we came to the logical conclusion, and we can sunset it and share the learnings, and that was great. or we're shifting our focus in a different way. A lot of networks have really gone through these important renewal stages that completely shift the focus, but it's not just trying to continue the thing into perpetuity for the sake of continuing it. It's getting more and more clear about what is our focus here, and what can we actually do and how can we execute on that. So continually revisiting each of those activities, and not just considering them a linear process.
Yeah. It's funny because, for me as a software engineer, I feel like my bias has always been around things that feel hard, like smart contracts and programming trust. And if we have aligned incentives, then everything else will just be taken care of. But I think that the more and more I get involved in DAOs, it feels like there's as much connective tissue to be built at the social layer as there is like programming our values into our money. And it feels like a lot of these networks have their like hard and rigid governance principles that are programmed on chain, or in a corporate charter if you're doing something that has a legal, like a corporation. But it's really the culture and the social layer that is where a lot of the action happens. And there's this saying in networks that show me the incentive and I'll show you the outcome. But I've seen a lot of times in which the incentives are aligned and the outcome does not happen because people aren't coordinating, and maybe where they're lacking trust, or they don't have coordinated actions, or they haven't been convened. But it's been a real learning exercise for me going through the last market cycle with DAOs to see how much of an art it is to do this. I'm curious if you've seen the same.
Yeah, I think I would explore the incentives piece. Maybe it feels like they're aligned because we're talking about financial incentives and focusing on that, but people are nuanced and they're really complex, and we have a lot of different things that drive us. The vast majority of the impact networks that I've been involved with didn't have any direct financial incentives, but people kept coming back, and they kept engaging and contributing their time because they got value in lots of other ways. There was the social capital, of course, but then there's also the value coming back to their personal learning, the value to their organization. The network actually helped them get things done that they wanted to achieve, and it unlocked new possibilities for them. So they weren't being involved because they were getting some kind of direct financial return. So by just looking at the financial incentive structure, you would be wondering why people kept showing up and contributing so much time to these efforts. But I think it's because it's not just financial incentives that drive us, and sometimes those actually kind of corrupt the behavior of different actors and draw in the wrong types of actors. So I'm really curious about how we can blend that social layer that you mentioned that we've been talking about, and then also the technological layer, the trustware, to be able to form really dense, high trust, high functioning communities, but also bring on structures and mechanisms that allow us to scale beyond which we can form direct relationships with one another and engage many more people, and retain the individual autonomy of actors to be able to rage quit and go off and do their own thing if they don't like the direction of the community as a whole. So I think there's a really interesting blend of both that I'm looking for.
Working in Web3 is awesome. It's freeing, powerful, and so much fun. But working outside of the typical W-2 employee structure is a deal breaker for so many. OPOLIS is helping the self-sovereign worker focus on what they do best, their work, while managing the back end for them. There is a lot of nation-state overhead when working in Web3, and OPOLIS takes care of all of the back-end stuff, freeing you up to do what you do best. OPOLIS leverages group buying power through a community employment co-op, helping you save 20 to 50% on high-quality, affordable healthcare options through Cigna. So, do what you love and maintain your financial security. With OPOLIS, you must be authorized to work in the United States to receive OPOLIS benefits, but OPOLIS is expanding its services to Canada starting on January 1st, 2023. So, book a 30-minute consultation with the OPOLIS experts and join OPOLIS by December 31st of 2022 and get 1,000 work tokens and 1,000 bank tokens when you sign up. So go to connect.opolis.co/bankless to get started. GOLDFINCH is a decentralized credit protocol with a mission to connect the world's capital to the world's growth. GOLDFINCH focuses on real yields from real companies, so start lending your USDC to real businesses driving growth worldwide. GOLDFINCH's borrowers are proven fintechs and credit funds in emerging markets who need access to GOLDFINCH's capital to drive economic growth in regions faced with barriers to financial access. In just under 2 years, GOLDFINCH has loaned over 100 million USDC, reaching over 1 million people and businesses across 28 countries. GOLDFINCH is doing what DeFi was always meant to do, expanding financial access to those who have historically been shut out of the TradFi system. So, become a GOLDFINCH member to put your USDC to work, empowering real businesses' growth. Join GOLDFINCH's new member vaults to be an active investor and take part in supporting GOLDFINCH's security and expansion. Receive yield enhancements generated by protocol revenue, plus access exclusive communication channels and more. So go to goldfinch.finance to get started.
Well, I want to weave back into some of the concepts in impact networks. But before we do that, I think that I want to pull the thread of the work that you're doing now, because I think it maybe blends that social layer stuff and actually smart contract permissions. So what are you working on now? Is it in the DAO space at all? And how does it help with some of these problems?
Yeah, so a co-founder of HATS Protocol, which is really all about how do we structure decentralized organizations to get things done? How do we delegate specific roles and responsibilities and authorities to any layer of the organization, individuals, teams, and the organization as a whole to get things done? The recognition here is it's really flowed out of my experiences, my co-founders' experiences in DAOs, and also my experiences with impact networks and what they're really good at and what they struggle with. So many of the impact networks I've been involved with have been so good at bringing large numbers of people together to address those complex issues. But then when it comes down to the level of actually consistently executing to get things done, they often struggle unless those responsibilities are delegated to specific individuals. And a lot of times, in that case, to specific organizations who have the hierarchical structures to go execute on something that's in the complicated domain. In DAOs, we've rejected hierarchies for a lot of reasons: the centralization of power and decision making, the unequal distribution of rewards, and gone to the other side of the spectrum of relative structurelessness and kind of created a tyranny of structurelessness in a lot of cases. And they're challenged with lack of role clarity, lack of awareness of what each person is responsible for, where there's unnecessary duplication and where there are gaps where a new contributor could plug into, and doing a constrained delegation of responsibility and authority to empower individuals to get things done, to make decisions without having to go through the consensus governance processes. And a lot of times I'm seeing delegation happening in very, very broad ways, where we're delegating decisions across all domains to a group of individuals. I don't think that makes sense, because people don't have the same context on each decision or the same level of expertise on each decision. We need to be able to delegate decisions and actions to individuals and teams that have high context and that are directly responsible for those and can be held accountable for those. So HATS protocol is a way to delegate individual roles to individuals and bring it with it, because we see roles as the basic unit of structure in an organization. Roles have been present throughout generations in every form of human organization, but roles are not very present in DAOs, oddly enough. And what do contributors need to be able to contribute well? They need clarity around what they're signing up for, what they're responsible for. They need the context, the information they need around that. They need the associated authorities and permissions. So it unlocks the different applications and other platforms they need to do their work. And then the accountabilities, which goes both ways. How can the collective hold the individual accountable, doing what they say they're going to do? And how can the individual be sure that the collective is going to provide them with the compensation that was agreed upon? All while the structure that doesn't have a single person at the top, but the organization as a whole, the DAO as a whole, holds the ultimate authority. But we can still co-create these structures to get things done when needed.
Yeah. I got to say that I think HATS protocol is mimetically one of the best named protocols that I think I've seen out there.
Thank you. The hats. I don't think we're on video, but you know, we've the hats have taken off pretty well, and we've wondered if we should just be partnering with MetaFactory to do some interesting access control with actual hats. But
Yeah.
in any
Well,
case,
I just like the mimetic value of, oh, I'm going to wear this hat, and it's the same as getting a role within a DAO, and having that easily revocable and modular within different pods and DAOs.
yeah, exactly. And just to explain that a little more, so how it works is what we call a hat is an 1155 NFT, although it's non-transferable by the wearer. It's transferable by the DAO itself, and so you can assign a hat, that NFT, with a few things. You can assign it with a specific role and responsibility. You can attach it to the different authorities or permissions that person would need to do that work. And you can connect it with different accountability mechanisms. And then you can also tie it to specific eligibility criteria, like what tokens or badges or verifiable credentials the person has in their wallet. Are they eligible to wear that hat, or they're eligible to wear the hat as long as they retain a delegation threshold above X% by a specific group of people. You can embed your own custom logic, and then you can also toggle the hat on and off. And a really nice piece of the architecture is that each hat can then create additional sub hats underneath it. So, as we delegate specific roles and responsibilities, people wearing those hats can further delegate and break down those roles and responsibilities, delegate them to other individuals, to other teams, and even other DAOs. And I'd really like to see this as a mechanism for increasing actual coordination and even collaboration between different DAOs ecosystem instead of just within a specific organization.
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, the last of the 5 C's are cultivating trust, coordinating action, and collaborating for systems change. So it feels like your journey now with Hats Protocol is a continuation of the Impact Network stuff that you've done in the past.
Yeah, totally. It's definitely directly evolved out of that, and it's something that the networks that I've been involved in would really need. They need better role clarity. Again, we can start at a high level and bring people together to identify specific needs and specific things we can execute on. But then when we get to that level, that's where we can really add in more structure, and we can delegate more specific roles and responsibilities to go get things done. Ultimately, people are the ones who go execute on work. I think we can think and plan really well in groups and teams, but we need to be able to delegate authority to individuals and empower them to get things done.
Well, I've got a couple of other things in my notes that we could go through: principles of network leadership, different types of network leader roles, the dynamic tensions that exist in impact networks are interesting to me, and would love to go down that. But I'm curious if there's anything that I didn't ask you that you want to say. Kind of choose your own adventure for the remaining 15 minutes of the episode.
Oh man, well, I'd actually I would want to hear your thoughts on a million things, but this is your podcast, so people can already go listen on all the other stuff. But I think leadership is one thing that I want to touch on, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on leadership in this context as well. Because it's my belief that leadership always matters. It matters so much. It's just, especially in collaborative context, it's just a really different form of leadership than we see in hierarchical environments. And I see a lot of times in collaborative groups and even in small working groups, people are hesitant to kind of go forward and take leadership and show direction, and but it's leadership that's not directive. It's really facilitative, right? It's leadership that isn't about telling people what to do, but it's creating the conditions for self-organization to support people to discover what they can and want to do together, and then helping keep things coordinated together. There's a few different key roles of network leaders that I've seen. I'd love to get your thoughts on this. One is catalyzing, of actually bringing people together for the first time, or catalyzing a new project, or catalyzing a new conversation. starting things, right? The second is facilitating. Okay, so then when people are there together in a space or community or team, how do we actually combine these different perspectives to reach an outcome? Third is weaving. How do we see the structure of relationships that exist across the system and improve the webs of connections between them so that we reduce the points of fragility that are dependent on a really narrow bridge, or dependent on two people connecting different parts of the system together? How do we actually notice when people could support each other's work and then go the extra mile to actually connect them together and share that context? And then fourth, coordination, which is a lot of the back of the house, kind of setting up the infrastructure, providing structures that are really fit for purpose, and building just enough structure in order to fit the needs. Not over structuring, not defining rigid rules well in advance, but really building the structure as we go. Kind of like as a garden starts to develop, providing stakes or trellises that the plants can hang on to. You're not directing their path exactly, but you're giving them the support they need to grow. I'm curious your thoughts. What do you see in terms of what does good leadership look like in DAOs or in these types of collaborative environments?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And, I think you've identified a lot of dynamic tensions there. And I wish that there was, and the engineer in me wishes there was like a formula that you could just follow and you would get there. But, a lot of this stuff with the dynamic tension feels like finding a middle way between different routes. And I think that that's the challenge of Web3. And you kind of have to accept that when you get into Web3. Like if I was in Web2, the playbook for Web2 entrepreneurship is pretty well trotted. Like you just either get as many eyeballs as possible and sell as many ads as possible, or you have a subscription model and you get as many subscribers as you can. You minimize the cost per acquisition, and you increase the lifetime value of each subscriber, and then you sell to Google for $150 million or something like that. That was like the Web2 model. And with DAOs, it's much more of a complicated n-dimensional design space. And I think that we're still trying to figure out our path forward in a DAO based world. But one thing that I think that I've been diverging, so maybe I'll try to converge on one thing, and that's from my position. One area I've found that I've been able to do is try to create clarity, and especially across different domains. So like back when I was at Gitcoin, like I've since disaffiliated from Gitcoin DAO's leadership, but like back when I was still at Gitcoin DAO, like because I was the founder, I understood the engineering and the product and the marketing, and being able to create that cooperation across those two things, I think was really, really important for like just so that they understood each other, so that they could talk to each other. And if you can drive for clarity, that everyone knows the shared objectives and the mission and the considerations across the design space, I think that is one thing that I would love to see in more DAOs, and especially at Gitcoin DAO. Quadratic funding is a little bit complicated, and that's what Gitcoin's core product is. So yeah, I don't know. It's a very n-dimensional design space, but that's at least one direction that you could go.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think it's so valuable to have the people who are capturing information from different parts of the system and then helping synthesize it and get that information to where it's needed. Like back in Web2 company, I was part of the knowledge management team, and that was very different. That was like logging the learnings and the data and putting it into a database that nobody read. Really what we need is people to go out and talk to the different working groups, talk to the different parts of the system, understand what's happening, and then help to facilitate the flow of information and then resources so they get from the right place to the right place. I like too that you keep bringing up the tensions piece. I think that's such a key role here is holding tensions and being aware of the different tensions that exist. Tensions like, should we do X or Y? That's a clear tension, but that's a really clear choice. But a lot of tensions, there's no right answer, right? It's should we take the time to cultivate the community and strengthen the flow of information, or should we take the time to go execute and take action? That trust, that tension of building trust and taking action is so present, and both are important. And how do we emphasize one in certain areas and another in different areas? Tensions too around participation and pace, like engaging more people, but then that might limit us in terms of the pace of decision making. Tensions in terms of the only way that we can discover where we overlap and what we agree on is by diverging and exploring the many different perspectives that we have and the places where we disagree. And we have to hold the tension through that discomfort and that ambiguity until things start to converge again, and we can see where there's some alignment and we can move on that. And I think it is a huge role of leaders to be able to hold those tensions and to be able to name those tensions when they exist. Just naming them and bringing them into awareness a lot of times helps people relax, because we're feeling the temperature in the room rise when there's something going on and we can't quite put our finger on it. And when somebody names the tension that's taking place, we can relax and then we can start to actually think our way through it.
Yeah, totally. And you would hope that in an honest, well-meaning group of people that you could sort of manage those tensions together, although it's always a little bit harder in practice than it is in theory.
Yeah, it's not easy to engage in conflict or disagreement, and that's where it is really valuable to the cultivating trust piece is really about, like, it's so valuable to take the time to go slow initially so that we can go faster later. To build up some shared awareness of each other's perspectives, of the why that's bringing us here, of our constraints, what's limiting in us, and also our personal incentives, or the people that we are accountable to, and so forth. Just understanding more about each other's context, not just the external context, the things we see and can infer about each other, but the internal context. What's actually going on? What are your underlying beliefs and motivations? Doesn't take that long, but if we take some time to be in that space first, it really facilitates the conversations about the places where we disagree, because we have a foundation of maybe not trust yet, but at least goodwill, or at least shared understanding, so that we can hold in that more challenging space of the places where we disagree. And so I really encourage people to don't jump straight into action. Take a little bit of time to go slow initially, to build the webs of relationships, build the direct connections between people, and understanding the commonalities in terms of motivations and values between people, and because then the action that you take is going to be that much more fruitful.
Well, unfortunately, we've got another dynamic tension, this being a really interesting design space, but also a very vast one, and our limited time here. So I've got to start moving towards wrapping us up. David, where can people find you and your work online?
Yeah, so you can find me on Twitter at Dave Ehrlichman, DAVEHRLICHMAN. You can find the Impact Networks book at impactnetworks.xyz. That also takes you to the Converge website, which is a network I started in 2013, co-founded to build impact networks. And there you'll find the Impact Networks documentary and also an open source toolkit of lots of different facilitation guides and other tools that you can use. That's where you found the book images. And then for HATS Protocol, you can find that at hatsprotocol.xyz and also on Twitter at HATS Protocol.
Very cool. Yeah, we'll have those links in the show notes for easy clicking. All right, David, thanks so much for joining me. This has been great.
Yeah, I appreciate the invite.